Hey everybody, you're listening to the podcast of the year, the greatest podcast ever made. It's called What Do You Really Think? I am Marc Lamont Hill, and joining me is...
Still here, Buck Sexton, everybody.
This is a fun year, Buck. I did not know when this year started that we would be doing a podcast together, and I certainly didn't know we'd have one that people came back to listening every week, but they keep coming back.
And actually, more and more people are coming to listen to it, which is kind of fun, which I guess means that there's something worthwhile here. I still have not yet had the great honor of giving you extensive tutelage in top 80s action movies, but we will get there one week. We'll get into that at some point in time. And I need to know, before we actually get to the Christmas holiday, have you watched the greatest Christmas movie of all time, which is Die Hard?
Oh, God. There's so many things wrong with that, right? There's the category error, as philosophers would say, right? And then there's the question of whether it's even that good.
Oh my God!
So first, and this may be our biggest disagreement. You see Die Hard as a Christmas movie.
It takes place on Christmas Eve, and there's a lot of Christmas references. It is, in fact, a Christmas movie.
Okay, just because it happens on Christmas doesn't mean that it's a Christmas movie.
The bad guys lose, the good guys win. Santa Claus, ho, ho, ho references. Now I have a machine gun too. I don't know, man. The whole thing is like set in a Christmas party. Just because a bunch of weird German guys with bad haircuts have to get blown away doesn't mean it's not a Christmas movie.
That's exactly what makes it not a Christmas movie. That's kind of the thing.
I'm just saying. I mean, yeah, so Santa doesn't show up with his reindeer. Instead, it's the FBI blowing a bunch of guys away, which I have to say the FBI guys in that movie are really like one of the gems of the experience, especially if you go back and watch it again and again. There's some great stuff in there. So before I get into the real like biggest stories of the year and everything else, the best holiday song is.
I gotta say, and you're gonna disagree with me, but I'm gonna say Mariah Carey.
You probably like Love Actually too, don't you? Or you've been forced by enough girlfriends. You've been forced by enough girlfriends. Marc, damn it, man, this is crazy.
So what's funny is I actually love Bridget Jones' Diary and Love Actually, that whole suite of movies. I've actually only seen them alone or with my brother. It's the weirdest thing. I just stumbled into them one time. But those are also better holiday movies than Die Hard. So just to not lose this Die Hard moment, even if Die Hard were a Christmas movie, would it be better than Christmas Story? Would it be better than Trading Places? Would it be better than Home Alone? Would it be better? No.
I mean, okay, if you're asking me what my favorite, like, legitimate in the genre that we can all agree on Christmas movie, I will say Home Alone holds up very well for what it is. Like, it actually is pretty timeless. It does a very, very good job. I think a lot of the other Christmas movies are pushed mostly by nostalgia. The one where the kid wants the BB gun is very good. Is that A Christmas Story, or I forget what that one's even called? But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's one where a kid wants a BB gun, and he like licks a pole. His tongue gets stuck to the pole. You know, I remember like bits and pieces of it. I used to see it all the time when I was a kid. But yeah, I mean those are good. Those are all very good films. So you say the Mariah Carey "All I Want for Christmas Is You," which I cannot think of anything other than Love Actually, and all I can think about in Love Actually is the lame Hugh Grant president giving some lecture to somebody who's obviously supposed to be some avatar for Bush, like, oh, like, how dare you, like, grab our bottoms and come over here and do all, you know, it's like, come on, man. Like, this thing is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And since you're bringing it up, I will say that clearly you are RIP, but a person who likes the work of, I'm forgetting his name, Hans Gruber, his real Alan Rickman. Alan Rickman, who played Hans Gruber and then was like the kind of, you know, boss who's not really like, he's a little sleazy, gives the gift, but like he's, you know, you feel bad for him because he realizes he made a big mistake with the wife, the whole thing. So
yes,
we got into some.
If I got to, and again, just to be clear, I'm not a holiday person. I don't celebrate Christmas. I don't do anything. But if there's one thing that I have been sucked into over the course of the 42 years I've been on this planet, it is absolutely the films, because you can't get away from them. You can't get away from them. And I gotta say, you know, and the music, I avoided Christmas music, but what Mariah Carey did was genius, right? She made a song that was not only good, but that sounded like it's always been around. Like there's a way that when you hear All I Want for Christmas Is You don't realize that the song's only like 15 years old, 20 years old, right? You would think the song's been around for, like, she makes it sound like a remake. Like she's made something that sounds like a classic. That's a pretty hard thing to do at the level of production. So I give, if I were giving an award, it'd be that one.
The greatest female vocalist of the last, let's just make this easy because I don't want, I mean, I actually am a big fan of Ella Fitzgerald and Nina Simone, and, you know, we could talk about that another time. But the greatest female vocalist of your lifetime, my life, we're basically the same age, is it Mariah Carey?
No, it is not. And I'm assuming we mean pop vocalist. I'm going to say Whitney.
Yeah, keep jazz out of it and all those genres, pop music.
Because there's like a Layla Hathaway, Rochelle Farrell thing that would blow them all away. But I would say Whitney Houston. I'd say Whitney Houston by a hair over Mariah. But I don't think Mariah is the wrong answer.
I would agree with you. And I will tell you that I feel like I should get a little bit of a high five here for not being one of those boomers who is like Celine Dion. I'm like, no, I refuse. I refuse. I do not like her songs. I do not like her voice. I don't like any of it. I don't like any of it. So
I'll say in this generation coming up, Adele has a real chance at being that person. As a pure vocalist, you know, Beyonce obviously is the whole package, but as a pure performer, I think Adele is up there in this new kind of run. But yeah, Whitney for me, there's nothing like Whitney, you know. But you didn't tell me what your favorite holiday song is, though, or greatest holiday song of all time is.
Oh my gosh, I'm a man. We're not allowed to say "Baby, It's Cold Outside" anymore, right? Because that song now is like there's like a lack of consent or something. There's some problem.
You know? It's a rapey song, yeah.
It's a little rapey. That's what they say.
Yeah.
Man, you know, I'm going to tell you something, and I've never admitted this out loud before. I'm someone who thinks that people start playing Christmas music too early, and I am not really a Christmas music person. Like I'm a play Christmas music on Christmas Day guy, maybe, and that's kind of it. So if you're telling me I got to go with with one song, man, and like not a hymn, so like that would be the easy cop out. It'd be like, oh, I like Bach or Joy to the World or whatever, right? I would say, man, what are some of what are even some of the? I can't even think of a Christmas. I kind of don't like Christmas music. This is what I'm admitting in real time.
Well, we are simpatico on this one because I hate it. Let It Snow by Boyz II Men is a good modern one. That's actually a pretty nice interpolation. Of course, there's the classics like Silent Night, Little Drummer Boy.
I would probably Let It Snow would be high on my list. So Jingle Bell Rock is kind of fun. But I don't have. Oh, I don't have any.
Donny Hathaway, This Christmas. That is actually the best. I withdraw my previous statement. Mariah's number 2. Donny Hathaway's This Christmas. To anybody who's never heard this song, if you're into holiday music, listening to Donny Hathaway's This Christmas is epic. It doesn't get any better.
So let me ask you this, because we got a little bit of a year in review vibe going into this holiday period. What for you is the story or the thing that you either felt like should have gotten a lot more attention or should have been treated very differently from how it was treated in 2020?
Oh, that's a good one. The problem is COVID took up, pardon the expression, all the oxygen.
Yeah.
So any other story would have been could have taken that up. I think I'll say this. I think that the COVID story should have been talked about in a different way. I think the media starts off by talking about how we're all in this together and framing COVID as this universal crisis, similar to like 9/11, right? Where as Americans we come together because we're facing this common crisis. Yeah. And the truth is,
we know we are not all in this together. As anyone who spent any time in Palm Beach or the Hamptons recently and seeing what's going on out there versus what's going on here will tell you. But go ahead.
No, that's exactly right. And then when you draw this along class lines, race lines, regional geographic lines, this is a very different pandemic to somebody. And you made a great point a few weeks ago. there are people who are in so-called flyover states who aren't experiencing the pandemic in the same way that we are on the East Coast. And yeah, they know some people who have it, but they can basically go to the store, they can drive. And so their response to this, saying it's not that big a deal, is not because they're just like uninterested in other people's suffering. It's that they're experiencing it very differently. But conversely, people who live in housing projects who can't stand 6 feet apart, people who who are in prison or in nursing homes, who are basically confined, who also can't, who are being consigned to death. That's a story we didn't really spotlight enough. I don't think we talked enough about. I mean, we spent so much time talking about Donald Trump's poor leadership on this, which I think we need to have a conversation about. But and I think we talked about this last week. We didn't talk about state level leadership. I mean, let's unpack what Andrew Cuomo did or didn't do. Let's unpack what the governor of Pennsylvania, Wolf, did, who, by the way, has COVID as of 10 days ago or so.
Yeah, he had it in December.
Yeah. So we're talking about. I mean, this is stuff we need to unpack, and I don't think we've done a good job at it.
So I have my few takeaways on COVID that, and I always felt like this was one of these things this year where there were the political discussions around COVID, and then there's just the discussions about this thing and like what this thing is doing to people, to society, where the medical community is on this. I think that for a lot of people, I certainly saw it this way, and I know I'm not alone. I can't say how many others would agree with this, that there is a recognition that modern medicine, for all the amazing things it can do, also has a tremendous amount that it does not know, and that there are shortcomings. And because I think that we all grow up with some notion of like, there's always some guy like Dr. House, that show, Dr. House, the guy who goes around. Like, there's always this higher level you'll go to where like they'll find the answer or they'll know what to do. We're America. The same way that we think ultimately, like, our military can beat anybody. And like, yeah, like we think that, and they probably could, although China's got a pretty big military these days, but they probably could. And that's comforting. I think that in this war against a virus, what you saw was that for all of our billions and billions of dollars of research and R&D and all this stuff, we were caught in a place where we're like, we didn't know how dangerous it was. We didn't know how quickly it was going to spread. We didn't know how to treat it. We actually treated it. This is a huge thing that is just fact and people don't talk about. We treated it really in many ways the wrong way early on. They've made these adjustments now, even things as simple as putting people on their bellies instead of keeping them on their back so they have better airflow to their lungs, and how essential that is because it keeps them, it's less likely they'll have to go on a ventilator earlier. And once you go on a ventilator, you're in this whole other category. There are all these things. And I just think people realized how vulnerable we are, and also that there is not some medical genius out there, and there's not some system that's going to fix everything for us. And there still are these, it was kind of humbling, I guess is what I'm trying to say. There was like this humility we were reminded as a species that there isn't some room of super geniuses somewhere who, when you go in, they're going to be like, oh yeah, we've got this.
Problem solved. Right. No, I think that's right. And I think that humility is necessary for moving forward with plans, So part of what it means to have, and take the politics of Trump versus Obama out for a minute. At the very least, going into the Trump presidency, there was a pandemic playbook. Again, we can debate about whether or not how effective that playbook would be for this particular crisis. I think there's a legitimate conversation to be had about that. But I think now moving forward, we know that we can never be in a position again where we don't have 500 million masks somewhere, right? We have to know that we have to be constantly in a state of preparation and development. We have to be thinking about how to contain a virus. I think in the same way that after Ferguson, you had to really think about what your police department was going to look like after the kind of Black Lives Matter moment. You had to really have those conversations. Now, when you run for president, there should be some real conversations about what your medical response is going to be, what your pandemic response is, how you're going to deal with public health.
So can I also, ask you then, so the comparison or talking about the playbook, and I appreciate that, for now, we're not going to get, whose side of it did better or whatever. But I mean, if you look at the U.S. overall and you look at state by state, and you have some Republicans, Democrats in charge in some places. Yeah. And you look also at what's gone on in Europe in this year of 2020, where Italy, advanced, industrialized, wealthy European country, a horrible time with COVID. Spain, same thing. UK, same thing. Belgium, Germany a little better than the U.S., but actually not much better when you look at the aggregate numbers. We do test more than other places, and everyone always makes fun of it. Testing doesn't make cases. Yeah, but more accurate data sets over a wide population means you're going to have you're going to capture more of the cases you have. So it does mean that the number seems higher of cases. So I think hospitalizations and mortality are a much more important metric. And European countries, in the case that the UK is actual, like people always talk about socialized medicine in this country, and the people that I know actually, they're like, it's not actually socialized medicine. There's some socialist perhaps tendencies within the system, but it's not socialized medicine. The UK is social. The doctors are paid by the state. The state, it's all funded through taxes. And the UK is actually a socialist healthcare system, and they did not fare any better than we did, right? So,
true.
And I still haven't heard any. I haven't heard any honest and serious explanation of how not just Japan and South Korea seem to escape with far less than we did. And I think we'll eventually find out that their populations were just, the compliance starts right away early. They were just prepared for a pandemic the way that like California in the 80s after the big earthquakes was sort of prepared, more prepared for earthquakes than the places were. I think that's part of it. But also they may have been exposed to COVID variants that, and who even knows where this thing came from these days. There's still a lot of debate about that. But there's still, I guess my part of it, just intellectually, I find that there's still so much that is unknown, and it doesn't really seem like anybody who is in a similar position to the U.S. really knew how to handle this thing at all. I don't know. That's just my feeling. I mean, we have. Go ahead.
That's right. I think that's right. And that's why some of the conversation about what could be done is this could not have been prevented. It could have been contained more, right? And different leaders would have handled it differently. But I think my point is more that we just as a country don't think about public health in this way. And diseases, infections are something that happens over there. It's kind of like with 9/11, right? It's like, yeah, countries get bombed all the time. Embassies get bombed, leaders get assassinated in other countries. It's something that we as American citizens take for granted isn't going to happen here. And yet 9/11 was like, oh shit, this is happening on our soil. And then with this, it's like, oh, wait a minute. We've heard about, these infections that happen in Africa. And sometimes, someone will bring something over, someone will bring Ebola over on an airplane and we have to contain it quickly. But this idea that America, where everybody we know is 1 degree of separation away from COVID, no more than 2 degrees of separation from COVID. That's something we couldn't imagine. And I think that the humility that we've developed as a nation about, one, what we don't know, as you pointed out, but also our vulnerability will make us stronger if we respond, if we move forward with a plan. And I think the UK, your point is absolutely right. UK, Italy, Greece has its own issues, but, here, like, we're all countries that quite frankly, all have that level of arrogance and sort of assumption that it's not going to happen here. This doesn't happen here.
Yeah, and also I think people get used to a certain access in the healthcare system, and they feel like as long as they have that access, everything's going to be fine. And no one ever thinks of, well, what happens if all of a sudden everyone needs to use the healthcare system at the same time? Which, when you think about the history of pandemics and how it's all played out, I mean, here's just the J.P. Morgan was essentially founded by, I believe it was Aaron Burr, to compete with Hamilton, and it was initially the water. It was essentially a charter to form a clean water company in Manhattan, and it was because they were so concerned about disease. In particular, they would have these breakouts. I'm forgetting actually which. I don't think it was typhus. It was what's the disease? Cholera. They would have cholera outbreaks in the water. And so the only way you could set up a bank was also if you had a charter that was for a state good. And so the state good that the bank was supposed to pursue was clean water for New York City, because this is now taking us back into the early 1800s. The tenements, which were overwhelmingly Irish and Italian at the time. I've actually gone to the tenement museum, and they have these different experiences, whether you're an Irish or Italian immigrant, and later Jewish immigrants. I'm sorry?
I got to check this out. I've never been to the museum.
No, actually, it's interesting. It's cool. Yeah, the tenement museum on the Lower East Side. It's actually worth going to. And just you would have thousands and thousands of dead people from an outbreak of cholera, and it would be because, and and there's a lot of some of these stories, a lot of interesting interesting comparison you make, because who was dying in the highest numbers? Irish, Italian immigrants without access to clean water and very cramped living conditions. They were stacking the bodies up, they said, like firewood on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And what you also find out is that I'm forgetting the specific detail, but basically the Chemical Bank of New York, which is what it later became known as. And that's also why the JP Morgan seal is the Oceanus. It's actually the symbol for Oceanus, and it goes back to when it was a water company. And the Chemical Bank of New York, instead of bringing in water out from outside the city, the aqueducts, they wanted to make more money. So they set up some local reservoirs that were much more likely to be contaminated and didn't extend the full drinking water to the tenements that continue to rely on well water, which is, once well water gets contaminated, you are screwed. So anyway, they would have these breakouts, and at a time when the New York City population was much, much smaller than it is now, obviously, but they'd have them down to the 5 points of the Lower East Side, and they'd have thousands and thousands of people who would die from cholera, right? So, I mean, if you're talking about a population that's 1/10 the size of what New York is now, which, I mean, maybe it's probably even less than that when we're the period we're talking about, right? But having 2,000 or 3,000 people dead from cholera, that starts to look like New York numbers from COVID.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, I wish we had that level of nuance and historical understanding when we make public policy decisions, right? But I feel like so much of the conversation right now becomes bound up in scoring points. And so as a result, even the choices we're making, I mean, I think about earlier this year when Fauci, and I've never been shy about saying Fauci told us not to wear masks, or masks didn't make a lot of sense. And that clearly was a political move, right? Maybe Fauci found out more, but there's never an argument for saying that masks didn't help us. It seemed to me that because we were out of masks, saying, look, we should have masks, but we don't. So, do the best you can, would have made Trump look ill prepared and unequipped based on the previous administration's mandates or recommendations. So I think, again, we allowed politics, and this isn't even, and I'm not blaming Trump for this in this exact moment, although I think in a bigger picture, he has to be accountable. I'm blaming Fauci, who's supposed to be about public health. It's the same conversation I would have about Barr or anyone else whose job it is to be a kind of impartial arbiter, and not be caught up in, the political races. And so I think this year, maybe we've learned a lesson about how to separate some of this public health stuff, so that we don't keep so that 2020 New York or 2040 New York doesn't look like 2020 New York, which doesn't look like, cholera in the early part of the 20th century in New York. At some point we have to make a different choice.
Yeah, just so my facts are pretty much all correct, but I want to check them there real quick. It was the Manhattan Company. It was founded by Aaron Burr in 1799 as a competitor to Alexander Hamilton's Bank of New York. And so Aaron Burr got this, and it was chartered by the state. It could use surplus capital for banking transactions, raised $2 million, but the company did a poor job of its primary purpose, which was to provide fresh water to Manhattan, particularly to poorer areas, because of the multiple cholera epidemics that happened in the area. So big corporate. Yeah. So there's all, I just want to give people the exact names and the year, 1799. So the history, and by the way, that ended up being the biggest, one of the JP Morgan, I believe, is one of the biggest or the top 3 biggest banks in the world right now. Absolutely. So it was founded to bring clean water to people who were dying from pandemic disease, basically, or epidemic disease, disease that spread through the water. So our history, it's amazing when you look at this stuff. You look at New York, you say, right. There's a lot of stuff here that has not really changed. So I want to ask you about my big thing, I mean, I obviously look, the biggest story of the year is COVID. No one could, there's no debate about that. Yeah. And the second biggest story for me is obviously the election. I think everyone would understand why that is. But I mean, I would have said BLM and all that, and we have talked about that before. We continue to talk about it in policing and all that, and just sort of the unrest that hit the country. But for me, this maybe goes more in I think it's a really big deal, but it hasn't gotten the attention. And I think when people understand the full ramifications, they're going to realize we're in a different world in 2021 with regard to mass communication, the media, and everything else.
Agreed.
We went from social media companies telling us, and I rough approximations here, but like 4 or 5 years ago, even they would say, guys, we're just, you can't make death threats or you can't post something that's, flatly illegal, right? I mean, there's certain things, but we're not going to be policing politics, and we're not going to do that. And that was really the rap. That was the line. In the last 6 months, and particularly right before the election, it has become clear that social media companies, and they're open about this. I mean, they now have put out statements about, we have fact checkers and we have things that you can say and can't say. They're putting their thumbs on the scale of political conversation and discourse in this country. And maybe better to say they're putting their knee in their elbow, because these companies are more powerful, more influential, and have more say over what is thought and said in America than than any company, really. You got to go back to like the beginning of the printing press or something. I mean, this is a new phenomenon we're dealing with. And Mark, I know right now the keys are uniformly in the hands of the left or of the Democrats, progressives, whatever, at the social media companies. And so I think they like this. Do you think there will be some room for people to understand that strictly partisan censorship by companies of this power and magnitude is a problem?
Well, before we get to that, I want you to say a little bit more about the kind of censorship you're talking about. Maybe give an example or two, because I think you've experienced some stuff. And then I think...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, an example would be, so I got dinged official. So again, I'm not talking, there's a lot of sub people. So it used to be that there were these like weirdos on the right who were like, I would have 3 million Twitter followers, but I'm shadow banned. And everyone's like, no one likes you. Like this, you're not shadow banned. You're just in the shadows because no one cares.
Oh, you were, exactly.
We would sort of hear that. But, and I will say this, there are people who, Alex Jones, who I don't know the guy. I mean, I know he says some pretty crazy stuff. When he got effectively like de-internetized, I mean, he was canceled from, YouTube and, everywhere, Twitter and Facebook. When he got de-internetized, there are people who are saying, look, I think Alex, and this used to be, and this is what I want to drill into with you, this used to be a liberal principle. Yeah. They're using, the ACLU, the Democrats used to say, look, if you want to march in Skokie, Illinois, where there's a bunch of Holocaust survivors living in retirement, if you want to have a neo-Nazi march there, it's disgusting, it's despicable, et cetera. But we're not legally able to block you because of freedom of speech, right? There was the big Supreme Court case. You and I both know about that. That has seemed to just completely evaporate on the left, or at least I shouldn't say completely, but mostly evaporate on the left in favor of real censorship. For example, I said about the Danish mask study that this said that masks. This study, like I said, something like this study said that masks just didn't do anything in this study or something like that, which, to be fair, is what the study says. There is an additional context that you can add of, well, the study did not check for, does a mask prevent, or does a mask mitigate you spreading someone else? But as for mitigating for someone with the mask on, this large peer-reviewed study said, out of Denmark, and it's all on the internet, people can read it, said we saw no difference whatsoever. It didn't look at another thing. Based on my lack of context, not an incorrect fact, I was demonetized and throttled on Facebook. I was throttled and demonetized officially on YouTube, just across the board.
A reason?
I'm looking at this and I'm like, I'm sorry?
Were you given a reason, like an explicit and direct reason, or was it just
lacked necessary context for this to be considered factually accurate or something like that? But it was a context issue, not this is a blatantly false thing issue. And I look at this and I'm like, okay, I'm doing commentary. If you want to add context, or you even want to give me a note and say, please add context to this. That was not. It was you're done, kid. Done. Now I've since gone back and I've been able to sort of clean some of this up, but that's kind of scary level censorship. I mean, are you would you tell this audience you experience you experience censorship from your own side?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'd say from my side, but yeah, I think
from Democrats, I think. I mean, and CNN, right? Go ahead.
I would just say it's a universal. This is one of those issues. Yes. So first, to your point, and then I'll talk about my own experience, because I think censorship is something. I think censorship is something we need to take seriously, and we can't wait to take it seriously when people say things that don't cohere with our beliefs, right? Because a lot of times it's like, oh yeah, those people are being censored, yeah, but they're dicks anyway. Who cares, right? That's often people's attitude from the right and the left, right? Is it no one, and oftentimes I find that the people who are calling to deplatform and silence people are only doing it for people with whom they have significant disagreement. And then when it comes to their own side, they then become outraged about this. And so we absolutely have to be vigilant on both sides. I agree with that. I think there's a question, though, in social media when it comes to the distribution of information or misinformation from people with large platforms. I do wonder about the role that corporations also have to play in intervening. For example, if Donald Trump, I'm picking Donald Trump because he's president for a few more weeks and because he has a huge platform. If Donald Trump says masks don't work, period, does he have a right to say that? Sure. But that is such a dangerous exercise of free speech that I think we would probably all not think it unreasonable, at the very least, for Twitter to add some sort of addendum, like as they do now, to say like, hey, this thing has not been proven factual, and to direct to links from the CDC and other places that can at least challenge that argument. Now, if Trump puts out a study similar to the one you put out, I'm using Trump instead of you as the example, again, because of the size of his platform and the level of faith and trust people tend to have in their president versus people like us, right? Ostensibly. If he were to put that study out without the context, people would then take that and run with it without the context, which could lead to more and more people making a choice that is dangerous to society. Now, if the debate is whether or not the mask point is accurate or not, that's one thing. But if we could agree that mask wearing, at the very least, is a helpful thing to do, at least to prevent transmission, if we agreed on that point, then we could probably agree that he should be silenced or at least censured for making a comment that's counter to fact when it's such a high stakes one. Saying the Jets are the greatest football team of all time, who cares? Saying, masks don't work could be very dangerous.
Right, but this goes back to the very basis of a free speech argument, which is that it's never the stuff that is popular or that is acceptable that needs free speech protection, right? I mean, you can sit here and say Beyonce is the greatest female recording artist of her generation, and the Beehive is going to clap for you and say amazing. I can sit here and tell you that I think she's, good, but like kind of overrated. And like, I'm the one who's going to get censored, right? Like, I'm the one who's going to have all of America like, what the hell is wrong with you, right? Like, okay, so it's unpopular speech, such as my Beyonce position that I actually do hold, that would be an example. I know, see, but exactly, right? Whereas, if the people in charge on Twitter, if they're not going to censor you for saying what's the consensus opinion, they're going to censor me for saying what's not the consensus opinion. And let me, so you pick like what's sort of a very, and it's a little bit of the fire in a crowded theater argument, which I will say that people always cite that as though and I know you're not doing this, so I'm not trying to put that on you, but people always cite that as it's like citing fire in a crowded theater. It's like, yeah, that's what the Supreme Court said to wrongly decide that a socialist who was opposed to the First World War was not able to hand out pamphlets opposing the war because it was like shouting fire in a crowded theater, right? So this gets lost in the context of it's who determines what is actually shouting. Like, you better be very clear that you're actually talking about someone who's this is like incitement to violence, for example, right? Incitement to violence gets into a very gray area very quickly. What's incitement versus what's, motivating your follower? Okay, here, but let me get to the specifics of this argument. And then, I do want to hear sort of about your thoughts about the CNN situation. Because I think whenever we can make this sort of about our own experiences, I was saying in August that there is no factual or data-based argument for closing schools because of the risk to children. That was not a consensus opinion then. In fact, right. There were a lot of MDs, a lot of health experts who were just going on TV. Now, I know they would say, we were just taking the cautious position, blah, blah, blah. But I was going against the consensus. I was right. They were wrong. That's now understood. Even Fauci, everyone understands that there's no evidentiary basis for a risk to children in school. I mean, I think 2 children under 12 have died in the United States from COVID, they think. I mean, that's at right. A certain point, this starts to become, it's effectively zero. And should I not have been able to make that argument at the time because that was against, this is not proven by or, they bring in these third party. This is what they like to do. They bring in third party fact checkers. And everyone that I know wants to say, I actually could say the word. I'm so used to radio, but who the hell? I know what you're going to get me to actually curse on this show. Who the hell are these fact checkers? Like, what do they know? I mean, I don't even get to know who they are. So it just feels like this is all, and they're wrong. The problem is they're wrong sometimes. And so now you have the stifling of speech based on a standard of imminent harm because of wrong speech or fake news or whatever. But then what's your recourse or what's your redress when they get it wrong? And by the way, what I think the answer is too bad. It's a private company, private platform, tough.
Which is another.
Well, right, but to that, people turn around and say, okay, so you're actually a publisher. Your Section 230 is gone. Now you're responsible for everything, every libel case, everything that goes up on your site. You can now be sued for. And now you're out of business.
Fair, and that's a tricky kind of dilemma to be in. I think that, again, I'm okay with you. It's okay to spout bad information. I think it's okay to be wrong. And I think it's okay to have a public debate about whether someone's wrong or not. I think that, again, I think we all agree you shouldn't yell fire in a crowded theater. The question, as you pointed out quite rightly, is what rises to the level of that? Does a socialist saying that this war is bad rise to the level of that? We'd all say no, although we'd all agree that the fire part is bad. Does saying don't wear masks, if we knew that masks worked, right? Let me put it that way. Let me frame it that way. If you knew that masks were effective, and someone were to say that they were not, would you see that as something that should be censored? Excuse me.
No, and I'll give you my argument as to why. Right. And I would borrow even from Christopher Hitchens on this, because I thought his formulation around this was that there's a tremendous benefit that people get and that the public discourse gets from hearing what is wrong and hearing why it is wrong. So an example of this would be a lot of people, and this is just sort of a quick shorthand, and then I want to dig on the mask thing a little bit in a few ways that I think might kind of elucidate this point. But a lot of people make jokes about flat earthers, right? They'll make jokes about flat earthers. All the flat earthers are so dumb. And no one will ever really walk around in public and say, well, I'm a flat earther because of the social stigma around it. But what's fascinating is when you ask somebody, okay, how do you know if you ask a stranger on the street, how do you know the earth is not flat? Can you explain to me why? Yeah. Most people will kind of stop for a second and say, and it basically comes down to, now, by the way, like for Media Matters or whatever, I'm not a flat earther. I'm just trying to make an argument here, right? Yeah, just to be clear. But the point is that you need to hear the wrong arguments to understand the full scope of the right arguments. And all throughout history, I mean, I said this on Twitter, and this actually got a lot of play, and I think it's fair. Newton, Copernicus, and Einstein all would have been shut down by Facebook and Twitter had it existed, obviously, in their respective periods. And that breakthrough only comes when people are able to challenge the consensus and push forward ideas that, in the moment they are espoused, are unpopular.
Yeah, but the problem is all people and all ideas aren't the same. A bad idea or a wrong idea is different when it comes from someone who is charged to be an authority on the subject matter. So if the Surgeon General comes out in tweets, hey, masks don't work, surely we would have a different response than if I do it or if a flat earther does it, right? I mean, these are all different positions, and the problem is, in a world where social media following does denote status and power and importance, not to mention when you combine that with the actual status, power, and importance that some people have, like, say, a Donald Trump, what you can end up with is a world where the most powerful person in the world, Donald Trump, one of the most powerful people in the world, comes up with hundreds of millions of followers and says, don't use a mask. Just for example, hypothetically. That's not simply a bad idea that can be engaged because, one, no one has the power, no one has the kind of status or power to challenge that notion, right? This isn't the public square where we can have a debate at a cafe or a salon, right?
Wait, hold on. But wasn't that notion challenged and successfully so? I mean, I was invited to the White House Christmas party. They're like, masks required. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean.
Right. But again, this isn't an abstract sort of philosophical argument. If I win the debate such that for policy reasons or whatever reasons, they have to wear masks at the White House now, and I convinced 80% of the American people that I was right, because that's sort of what happens, right? Just like most people are convinced by the round earth theory, right? But there's still some flat earthers out there. If I convince 80% of people that masks are effective and the other 20% don't believe it, 20% of the American people is still 60 million people. And so if there's 60 million people spreading a disease because of this statement, then yes, that creates extraordinary danger for the rest of us who know it's not true.
So, but then it makes me think that we could go in this direction. And I'm not going to let you, now that I know that you're willing to, you'll talk to me about the CNN thing. We're not skipping past that one. So I want to know what your thoughts are on all that, because I have my own thoughts about censorship that behind closed doors. I mean, I'll tell you, I have my own problems there. I left CNN of my own accord. And I mean, because I knew that they were going to fire me if I didn't, right? I'm not saying that like, oh, I'm so great. I was surprised they wanted to keep me around for another year. And if I had, I'm quite certain they would have found an excuse to fire me. Or let my contract go. Wait, well, like it wasn't your job. It wasn't my job, right? It's an additional thing you're getting paid for. It's almost like it's as a contractor. For those listening, you're a contributor. It means you get paid an amount of money to show up. But I mean, very few people. It's like that's their job. That's usually one of 5 or 6 jobs one has in media. But back to what we were talking about a second ago. I feel like from a right wing perspective, if we were going to have right wing censorship, here's how it would go. And it's tough to see this, I think, for the other side, because right now they have their hands are on the levers, right? I mean, Zuckerberg and all the rest of them, Jack Dorsey, they see the world in a way that is aligned with the Democrat left wing perspective on a lot of things, not on everything, and certainly not on Marc Lamont Hill level, but like they're on a lot of things, like they would see things as Democrats, right? But if from the right, let's say this became even a legislative thing, which I think makes it feel more real, because like the right's not about to take over Silicon Valley, but we could again take over the government. And let's say that we decided that as a matter of law, Marc Lamont Hill arguing for the actual defunding of the police puts lives in jeopardy, because we know that areas with police presence and higher police presence have, and by the way, I'm not trying to argue about whether this is just,
I'm thinking
that areas with more police presence are, that there'll be safer people and less lives lost. And so what you're advocating for, defund police, is so dangerous to public safety and lives lost and, rapes and burglaries and murders and all that, that we just can't allow him to make that case publicly. I mean, is that different?
I think that the direct likelihood of public harm is the arbiter. And I'm not saying that it's not subjective. I'm not saying it's not a subjective process. You could make an argument that any choice, right, allowing women to wear skirts could lead to, we could make an argument for how something could destroy or do harm to society from any point of view, right? Letting men wear beards, I'm just picking random things, right? We could come up with reasons where long-term it could lead to harm. I mean, that's part of what the moral majority argued, right? Is that moral decay, watching Teletubbies could lead to this, to lead to this, to lead to this. That's different, though, I think, than saying this direct action will lead to people's death, right? Me wearing a mask or not wearing a mask could be the difference between me killing someone or not killing someone. That's different than me arguing.
So you're elevating mask to almost like a clear and present danger test or an imminent harm test.
So, but I'm saying at least that has to be so the only debate, yes. And so I'm saying the only debate should be whether or not that's factually true or not. But I'm saying but your point was, even if it were factually true, you'd still want people to be allowed to do it.
Yes.
And I'm saying, for me, it's the truthiness of it that determines whether or not you should be allowed to do it.
And this is why these free speech debates, I mean, you kind of return, there's a circular feeling to it, right? Because you keep coming back to Fauci told us, as you know, and I appreciate that you gave his explanation, which I mean, I thought was kind of bullshit, but it is his explanation, and you were able to get it right from the horse's mouth. That he said don't wear masks because they were worried they didn't have enough masks, but he didn't say that. So there's a dishonesty there. That's what we established. There is a dishonesty in that premise. And for the top public health expert to have said that early on in this, I mean, if I can tell you this, you wouldn't have a top public health expert ever say, don't get your kid vaccinated for measles. It's no risk to them. Like, that would be a reckless and crazy thing to say. Now we sort of treat the mask issue as though it's reckless and crazy to have any questions about it, when the top public health expert in the country said don't wear masks at the beginning of this year.
No, I agree. But again, that's sort of my point, right? Is that the debate then should be about whether masks rise to that level, but also there should be space to say, I disagree with public opinion. I disagree with what counts as common sense. That's different, but I think there's a difference between that and people in positions of power and authority asserting a claim as if it were true when the best evidence we have is counterfactual. Now, again, I'm not saying they should be silenced, but I'm saying I think we have to have, I don't want to be an absolutist of free speech in such a way that I have no provision for dealing with someone who says something wildly irresponsible. If you go on your platform right now and say vaccinations there's no benefit to vaccinating kids, you have a right to say that, and people have a right to disagree with you. I'm okay with, in some sense, I'm even okay with that, because I think
I would suffer. I mean, I like that example because there is. By the way, it's fascinating. I've done some research into this because I've gotten heat on the right for being pro-vax, like openly, and I like to make the argument to people. I'm saying this is not, you and I aren't going to agree on climate change, right? But I'm like, this is not climate change. This is not people say one thing to sound cool and then don't care. Every person I know who wants you to get vaccinated, they are, and their children are, and all their loved ones are, and like they're. So I try to make this argument to the right. What you get about this, and it's fascinating, is you actually have pockets on the right who are kind of anti-state, anti-control mentality, and then you also get the Google New Age kind of ultra elite hippie types in the Bay Area. There's actually pockets of no vaccination in Northern California, people that are driving around in Teslas and $2 million homes who are like, I'm not getting my kids vaccinated. Like, so it's this weird. So anyway, on the vaccination issue, I feel like the way that works isn't that Twitter shuts me down and says, you can't say that. It's all of a sudden, the public says, Buck, why are you doing that's irresponsible. All of a sudden my sponsors say, we can't be with a guy who's, opposed to that. Like exactly. The market kicks in, and Twitter and Facebook aren't allowing for that. They're saying, no. We established these guidelines now that are highly partisan. I think this is very dangerous. And I also think it's only going to get worse because these companies are so powerful that there is no pressure. This is what the right's going to find out the hard way. I don't mean to cut you off. There's no pressure that the right has to bring on. Google basically owns the internet. Amazon owns everything. Like, Amazon is like the store that gives you everything you need for your house, and Google is everything you need on the internet in ways that people can barely even comprehend.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Again, my argument isn't that you should be silenced if you make a bad argument about vaccines or masks or whatever. But I think having the platform fact check you and say, hey, this has been disproven. I think that's a reasonable public good that's being done, not deplatforming you, but saying, look, this shit isn't true. And based on the best evidence we have, and here are links, so that way the consumer of knowledge still has the opportunity to decide whether or not to listen to the CDC or to believe Buck or Trump or Marc or whoever, right? I'm okay with that. I think, again, the only time where I would want to stop something is if they were doing something that had an immediate direct impact on public health or public safety.
So I think we can say imminent harm. Basically, you're drawing a line at imminent harm. Like go drink Drano. It tastes delicious. You don't want people spreading that on, which is amazing, by the way, because there are these like Tide Pod. Like, that's actually, I try to think of the dumbest thing I could think of on the spot, but people actually do this crap.
Right. I mean, imagine if the president does that, or the mayor, or the governor, or Beyonce. Let's take Trump out of it. If Beyonce does this, or Taylor Swift does this, right? I'd be equally concerned with the impact on public. If Taylor Swift said, everybody right now, I'm going to be at a certain store that can only hold 100 people, right? And I said, the first 100,000 people that get here, I'm taking pictures with. And I know that by virtue of this tweet, 500,000 people are going to go down there, which is going to cause, a stampede. It's going to cause harm. Somebody's going to die. I think companies have a right to say, look, we don't want to do this.
Well, So you're kind of you're drawing lines at what would be, I think, in First Amendment discourse, things like incitement to violence, right? Like if I stood up and I said, "Hey guys," and literally yelling on a megaphone or something, just to make this example really clear, if I was yelling, "Hey, let's go, take baseball bats and beat up everybody at this Biden rally down the street," like, I'm held to account. It's not, even if I don't swing a bat, I'm held to account for that, right? It's not like, right, like you're sharing ideas.
But I'm making a slightly I'm making that argument. But
I know you're pushing the standard a little bit further from that. I get it.
Because I'm saying because a lot of times people say, yeah, because all those examples presume that someone is intentionally doing something irresponsible. And I'm saying, what about the person who's just dumb? What about the person who just has bad facts? What about the person who just has a really interesting argument that's just dead wrong and harmful, right? A flat earther isn't really doing any harm to anyone right now. Whereas a masker or whatever you want to call these people could be doing considerable harm, if or an anti-vax person could be doing considerable harm. But again, it's not urgent and imminent. So yes, I'm saying the urgent and imminent is my standard and my line. But I'm saying oftentimes people who have that line, they make it so narrow that you almost literally do have to be yelling in the theater, and they leave out the people who just make irresponsible claims in public spaces. And I'm saying when Trump makes an irresponsible claim, it should be fact-checked. But if he makes an irresponsible and dangerous claim, he needs to be deplatformed. And same for anyone else of that status.
Marc, great talking to you about this past year. We got another episode coming up next week. We're going to do a look ahead for everybody into 2021. I want to say Merry Christmas to everybody. Marc, you want to give out some holiday cheer?
Everybody who celebrates the holidays, I want you to enjoy, but most importantly, I want you to go out and buy a notebook. I need old school note paper and a pen. And I need you to be prepared next week to write down all of my predictions, because my predictions, similar to my prediction about the presidency, will make you a very successful person. I'm going to give you everything that's going to happen in 2021, and I'm going to be right about all of it.
I'm going to be here to tell you what's really going to happen, and that Marc had beginner's luck with this whole Biden thing, but we'll get into all of that. Make sure you subscribe. Also, tell a friend over this holiday break about what do you really think here on QuakeMedia.com.